essentially like 86% of 18 to 40-year-olds are concerned about climate change, and yet something like 96% of churches don't address it at all. Why would people be engaged with what the Bible has to say if the Bible doesn't have anything to say to the biggest things that people are concerned about today?
This is Down to Earth Conversations, where we hear from ordinary people who are helping to bring a bit of heaven down to earth. Kia ora. Welcome to another episode of Down to Earth Conversations with me, your host, Andrew Dixon. Today's guest, James Beck, is a speaker, facilitator, pastor, podcaster, author, and eco-warrior. We talk about the years that James spent working with Attitude, helping to shape the well-being of teenagers throughout Aotearoa, and his time working for the Parenting Place. We also talk about James's passion for the environment and how that is impacting his work, his church, and his spirituality, as well as his own podcast, Ngā Here, which brings together the environment, the Bible, and te ao Māori, the world of Māori. It's sure to inspire you and challenge you. This is episode 72 of Down to Earth Conversations. Here's James Beck. Kia ora, James. Welcome to the podcast.
Kia ora.
Ngā Here koe, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, ngā Here whā o kutupuna, no Kotarana, no Koreitia, no Ingarangi, Peritania, anō hoki. Engari I tupu aki kei konei, kei Waitaha, I raro I ngā korowai o ngā kohatu whakarekereko tamatia pōkai whenua. So my ancestors are from, all over the places.
Yeah.
Usual suspects, sort of
Picked up Scotland and
Ireland,
England. Yeah.
Croatia, though. I've got a whole
Right.
a whole Dalmatian strand to my whakapapa. So they came into the top of the North Island as gum diggers way back in the day. Cody gum. But I've lived basically under the Port Hills here in Christchurch for pretty much my whole life.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I have one wife. I think that's the right number. Well, for me. 3 kids and a dog, and that's kind of what makes up takes up most of my time.
Yeah. Girls, boys?
I've got 2 girls and a boy.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Actually, I was researching you for the podcast, and
Fine line between researching and stalking, isn't it?
Totally. But I kept going, oh, that's like me. Oh, that's like me too. And I was like, okay, so here's just a few things that we've got in common.
Okay.
Obviously, we're both living in Ōtautahi.
Mm-hmm.
We're both white males with beards.
Yes.
We're both married to Rebecca's.
Yes.
We both have...
Not the same one.
No, not
Different one.
Spelt differently. But we've both got 2 girls and a boy.
There you go.
We both work for churches. We like to talk. We both have podcasts. And we've both written children's picture books.
Your one is much better than mine.
No, your one's great.
Your one has a point. I remember when I first wrote Eliza Loves Rocks.
Yeah.
I was, speaking in churches a lot
Yeah.
and doing stuff with Attitude. And so I think people assumed that if I wrote a kid's book, it would have some sort of message.
Yeah, right.
But the message of that book is about a girl who finds a rock and then eventually finds out that it's actually not a rock, it's horse poo.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah. Is it based on a true story?
No, not at all.
Just something that came out of your mind.
Yeah, I sat with this on a flight with a really inspirational guy, also a children's author called Chris Lam Sam, award-winning musician, just epic guy.
Yeah.
And he was telling me about his process of writing a kid's book, and I was like, oh, it's always been on my bucket list. And he's like, well, get a draft to me by next week. Like, let's just put a deadline on it. And so I sat down, and that was just the first thing that came out.
Oh,
and
that's
then we
awesome.
sort of went back and forward, and
Yeah.
it shaped up to be what it is.
Yeah. I actually think that, it is nice for some things to have a point, like a message that they're trying to get across. But actually, for me, bringing a bit of heaven down to earth, which is, what the whole podcast is about, involves just beauty for beauty's sake as well. If kids are going to read and laugh and enjoy, job done.
Yeah.
So, when I came across your book, I was just like, man, that's cool. And I had, as I was reading it, I was like, I I've got this idea of what it could be. Is it that? Is it this? And I was close. I thought it might be dog poo because it was on the beach. But yeah, no, classic story.
Everyone loves a good poo story.
Absolutely. My 4-year-old's all into it. Like, yeah, poo and poop and every kind of word that is related to that is just like the funniest thing ever.
We do have a lot in common. That's actually really quite a long list.
It is. Yeah. I'm sure there's more, but yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
So you mentioned attitude. That was a big part of your life for a long time.
Yeah, it was quite a long season.
I mean, a lot of people know you through that, but there's a lot that won't. So do you want to tell us what was attitude, or what is attitude, and what was your involvement?
Yeah. So attitude is an organisation which is basically, it trains really incredible youth communicators who primarily go into high schools and talk about health and well-being. So sort of centred around Te Whare Tapa Whā as a model. We'll take that and apply that to a whole range of different topics. So mental health, relational stuff, getting on with your family, drugs and alcohol, romantic relationships. Yeah, so that's kind of it. And it is actually still, obviously COVID was really difficult for attitude, but it's still really big, you know. The speakers go and speak to hundreds of thousands of young people in high schools, intermediates, primary schools across New Zealand every year.
Yeah. For those who don't know what it is, what's the Te Whare Tapa Whā? Because it's beautiful.
Te Whare Tapa Whā. So the house, 4 sides. There you go. Te Whare Tapa Whā. Tā Mason Jury has this beautiful holistic well-being, sort of indigenous model of understanding flourishing and well-being, which is taha tinana, taha hingaro, taha wairua, and taha whānau. So these 4 aspects of what makes us holistically well: our mental and emotional health, our physical health, our spiritual health, our social whānau connection health. And then that whare sits on the whenua. So it's also about our connection to place and to whenua. So if you take that sort of like holistic, high water Te Whare Tapa Whā model, you can apply that to all sorts of different health and well-being topics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And so what was your role? You obviously started as a speaker.
Yeah, I stumbled into a job being a speaker, which was great. The reasonably well-known Matt Stott was the person who recruited me and trained me. Matt's an incredible guy. And then he left to go and create Soul Tour and everything that him and Belinda have done in that space. And I ended up stepping into his shoes, being a speaker down here in the South Island, and then eventually ended up being the national manager for the Attitude program. So developed had a wee team of people that worked with me, and it was a really fun season. Yeah. It was great when I was just engaged, and it was great when I was married, and then I had 1 kid and it got a bit trickier, and then I had 2 kids and it got a bit trickier. Yeah. Because essentially we'd spend about 3 months, about 12 weeks of every year on the road. Yeah. You know, you'd base yourself in, let's say, Invercargill, and speak to all of the schools in Southland for a whole week, and come home and then head to the Hawke's Bay the next week. And so,
which is great when you're single.
Great.
Yeah. I mean, same for me with my band stuff. Yeah. You know, we were doing 40 hours of work and 40 hours of band every week. And, you know, I can't even imagine doing that now. No.
I got to see a lot of the country, though. I'll tell you, there's 2 things that are really interesting to me about Attitude in that season as I look back on it. One is I got to see a lot of the country, and I got to go to small towns and actually connect with the people who live there. Cool. You know, normally when you drive through a small town, you go to the petrol station and get a pie or whatever, and then you keep going. But you'd be in a school talking to the people that make up that community. And so I feel like I've been to something like 70 or 80% of the high schools in New Zealand. Wow. So I have this really strange geographical understanding of the diversity of New Zealand. But secondly, I started working for Attitude in 2007 and fully finished in 2017, 2018, something like that. So I had front row seats to watch the impact of social media, and then smartphones, and then all the different apps that have come through. I had front row seats to see the impact that had on young people, on schools, on school culture, on anxiety, on mental health issues. It's been and continues to be a fascinating. I feel like we're all in a big experiment, you know, to see how these things change who we are and how we relate to one another for good and for bad.
Yeah. And so you were at Attitude, like you say, for quite a long time, and then ended up working for Parenting Place, which is connected, right?
Yeah.
I love. I was looking at your job title there. It's like Kaihanga o Ngā Mea, which is literally like creator of the things.
Yeah.
It's like, what a great job title.
Yeah, that's the benefit of getting to write your own job description.
Yeah.
I got to create my own job title, yeah.
Nice.
So, I went from managing Attitude, and then I stepped from Attitude, which is kind of the youth expression, or was the youth expression of what Parenting Place was doing, into the Parenting Place's programming stuff. So I looked after research evaluation and development, which was so much fun. I got to work with some people who are way smarter than me, and I kind of see myself as a bit of a translator. Like,
Right.
I think one of the things that I add to conversations is I can understand complex things, and then I work out ways to communicate them more simply, but without simplifying them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that was...
Because you don't want to dumb it down.
No, and it's really easy to do that.
Yeah.
As a youth communicator, that was a big part of what I did. And then I brought some of those skills across to looking at parenting programs and parenting approaches. And I think that was what I was able to bring in that space.
Yeah. Because people are pretty astute, right? Like, they can tell if you've dumbed it down for them. It's almost patronizing, you know. And yet if you've just taken something that can be quite complex and make it simple to understand, people really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, what a gift to be able to do that.
Yeah. Or at least that's what I try to do. I definitely think I'm attempting to do the same thing in the church space as well. Like, I love the Bible, but it's actually complicated and
Very
complex.
much. Yeah.
And to engage with it as if it's not, to pull out these simple truths and, you know, pull scripture out of context and just declare that. Maybe there's a place for that, I don't know. But to be able to take what is complex and communicate it simply without simplifying it, I think is really important for the church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you've come on, I guess you've honed and developed that skill as well. So you've taken what you did with Attitude for a long time, brought that into that research and programming kind of stuff. And now you're working with Wilberforce Foundation and with your church as well. Mm-hmm. I love seeing that journey of going, oh, actually, nothing's wasted, eh? Like, it's all helping get to the next thing that you're doing. And
yeah, I mean, I think God's a great weaver, you know. He rangatira, like someone who weaves groups of things together and pulls them together. And I very much agree that nothing's wasted. So I haven't lived my life with a whole bunch of goals, and I still don't. Yeah. My approach to life has been and will continue to be to just be faithful in the present, with doing a good job of the thing that's in front of me, and trusting that God will use that and is also preparing me for the thing that will come next.
Yeah, right. And so just kind of like noticing what you're noticing. Yeah, I heard someone say that recently, and I went, that's actually really profound, to be aware of what you are noticing, you know, and what those things are that are coming up for you that are the things that are in front of you. But so many times we just meander on through life and don't notice those things. Yeah. One of those things for you has been stuff around the environment, and that's something that you're quite passionate about. And we'll talk about that in a few different ways over the next little bit. How did you become passionate about that? Was it something you were always into? Was it was there a key moment or series of moments that kind of pushed you into going, actually, I've got to think about this well?
Yeah. Well, I grew up on a farm in Waihora, so out Selwyn way. So I was always involved in growing food from a really young age. My family grew calla lilies and cabbages and tomatoes, and I worked in greenhouses, and so I had a very agrarian sort of childhood, which introduced me into a really specific way of engaging with the whenua, which is it's there for us to use and for us to make it productive, and that sort of view of the whole point of creation. It's there to serve us as humans, and we're sort of separate from it, sort of stepping into a theological view of the whenua here. And then when I was like 19, I had a crazy experience with God and became a Christian and got really involved in churches, and so that became my whole like frame of reference, but got involved in, again, a church that its theology was very focused on how we get people to heaven.
Yeah.
So again, it was a disconnected theology from the reality of how we bring heaven here, which is why I love the name of your podcast, by the way. And so those two things sort of went together. So I had a very sort of dualistic view of matter and of spirituality as a result of all of that stuff. I think I can't actually remember when it was. Must have been like 2007, 2008, somewhere around there. I got invited, wearing my attitude hat, to be a part of this environmental camp, and we were asked to bring some sort of kōrero about how we communicate. One of the big issues in the environmental movement has been there's this core message to communicate that for whatever reason a whole bunch of people still aren't engaged with. So I think that's how we ended up there, but we spent, 5 days at this camp, and I still remember they put on the movie. No, I remember the movie. What was it called? Called Home. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Beautifully shot. The cinematography is just amazing, and it just gave a snapshot of where we are in terms of mankind and our relationship to and the impact that we're having on the planet.
Yeah.
And it was crazy, and it messed me up, and it started this journey for me. But to be honest, so I made a whole bunch of significant shifts in my life. I became a vegetarian and tried to reduce rubbish and did like a lot of stuff. And then I actually just became so overwhelmed by the state of the brokenness of environmental stuff that I became really nihilistic about it and was like, I actually don't think I can do anything, and kind of parked that as a thing. And when all I can do right now is try and stop young people in New Zealand from killing themselves, because that's a problem that maybe I can actually have some sort of impact on. So I put all of my time, energy, and focus into the work I was doing in and through Attitude. But this nagging, this thing matters, continued to sort of bubble away for me. And so I think it was maybe 2014, 2015. I had a few significant run-ins with Jesus around that time. One happened on top of a mountain, and one happened next to a river. And it's the river one that's how I stumbled back into going, I need to really step into this and take this seriously in terms of the environmental space. So running through a little reserve next to a river, and the reserve was just, I could see it was just degraded, right? Someone had clearly done some planting at some point, but this really annoying, noxious weed called Tradescantia had taken over and was just smothering everything, and nothing was regenerating. And I had that terrifying but amazing thought, which you should be really careful to think, which is, man, someone should do something about this.
Yeah.
I'm a really big fan of cautiously encouraging people to pay attention to those someone should do something about this moments.
Yeah.
Because my experience has been often God goes, why don't you do something about this?
Yeah.
And that was what happened. And so I started to explore how I, as someone who's not an ecologist and not a scientist, I don't know the names of lots of plants, or at least I didn't then, not trained in that space, how I could do something. And again, what I realized is I can tell a story, and I can translate, and I can round up people. And so I started working on this project in and through my church to go, hey, what if when we say we cared about the community, we actually demonstrated that in really tangible ways. And what we ended up doing is a little group of us one Sunday a month, instead of doing church in the traditional way, we would do church by going to this reserve and regenerating it and getting rid of the weeds and mulching and planting new plants. So that project's been going on for 3 years now.
Cool.
And I got to this moment in my life where I was looking at all the things that I was doing, and I asked myself the question, out of all the things that I'm doing, what is the thing that I find the most joy doing? Yeah. And I realized it was that little project, which was 2 hours once a month, And so I ended up approaching some people going, is there a way?
Yeah.
Is there a way that I could do this more? And is there a way that I could help other church communities to find some of the life and find some of the joy and find some of the meaning and purpose that our little church had found in going after this type of project? And it was in and through some of those conversations that led me into both working with Wilberforce and, as a result, working really closely with a Rocha and Eco Church to support church communities to step into and seriously integrate sustainability and creation care as a genuine expression of what it means to be a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, I love how when you tell that story, there are lots of moments, and there's lots of places where you could have gone, oh, nah. But you went, no, actually, this thing that just won't leave me alone, what's up with that? You know, and I think whether we're church people or not, I think many of us know that experience of something that's just sitting with us that's like, no, you just shouldn't leave this alone. And yet often we don't follow that up. We go, oh, no, someone else will do that. So to hear you go, no, actually, you know, I went and asked people, you know, how do I do this? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people would be too afraid to do that, but what's the worst that could happen?
That's
you know?
exactly it. It was really easy for me to come up with a long list of reasons for why I shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
You know, that total, that Moses experience of God calling him and he go, oh, but I can't because this reason, this reason, this reason. And, you know, I gave you some of the reasons just then. It's like, I'm not a scientist, don't know anything about plants.
Yeah.
Like, who am I to think that I can do something here? But you can get a lot of advice for the price of a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
If you just sit down with people and ask the next set of questions and you're open to learning. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty cool little project. It's a partnership with the council and our little church and the local school and the local kindy and the local community. And yeah, this cool thing has bubbled out of just going, there's something not right there. And I feel like I could help in some way to bring that into a little bit more wholeness. Yeah. Yeah.
What's it been like for others in your church to go, well, instead of meeting on a Sunday morning, we'll go and do this other thing? Like, because I can imagine a lot of churches that I've been part of, they're like, you can't not do Sunday morning the way that we do, you know?
Yeah.
Has that been a thing?
Yes. Yeah, is the short answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a whole range of ways to tell that story. I think really big picture, the way that we do church and the culture in which our church experiences are shaped have basically formed us to be consumers of church.
Yes.
And so if we're consumers of church and someone takes away the consumer product, it's the same as if you've got a drink that you really like and then all of a sudden you go to the supermarket and you realize it's been disestablished. You're like, that was my drink.
Yeah.
I was attached to that drink. So I think I know some people found it really difficult because it wasn't just my little group. My church community made the decision that we wanted to be a genuine expression of good for the world. And that meant that one Sunday a month, we as a whole church weren't going to meet together. People were invited to either join these little missional projects that we were doing or go and find their own way to be a blessing to the world, to be a blessing to their neighbours. Some people got it and they were like, actually, this is amazing. My life is really full. And so being given the space to actually go, I in this space am being encouraged to go and be good news to the world. Some people got it. Other people, it was super challenging for them because the way that they expressed faith was coming along to a thing and having that thing happen and then going home. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. What I am saying though is that there are a lot of churches that are doing that, and to have a few churches who are doing things a bit differently is probably good for the wider kingdom. Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is if you want that expression of church, it's pretty easy to find. It's not that easy to find expressions of faith that are different to some form of the status quo.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, even what you were saying about, you know, I'm a busy person, you know, quite often as churches we're trying to say, oh no, we should be loving people and we should be doing this and that. And people are going, you know, I'm already doing X, Y, Z with my life, and where am I supposed to fit that in? And you're going, oh, well, fit it in on a Sunday morning, you know, which, again, I can see why people found that hard, but also why other people went, oh, this is great. Yeah. You know, and I think, whenever there's a change, there's going to be people that struggle with that.
Yeah.
And there's going to be people that really embrace that.
Oh, and we made lots of mistakes. And if we could do it all again, we'd do it really differently. And it was in and through the time of COVID. And so we'd had, this really long period of time where we weren't able to gather as church. And so it felt like the church collectively asked the question, what does it mean to be church if we can't gather? What a fantastic question to ask. And I was so sad. I was so sad for just humans in general that there were all these things that could have been learnt in and through COVID. And so quickly we just went back to how things were.
Yeah.
Like, great example, I'm a runner. And so during COVID, the amount of people out exercising and the amount of people going, I feel so good being out exercising, and post-COVID, this is the rhythm I want to maintain in my life. And literally like a month after the lockdowns finished, there was just no one around. It just instantly went back to normal. Like, our ability to forget the things that we know are good for us and go back to patterns of living and being that aren't good for us are just so profoundly human.
Yeah.
But I think the church went through a time where it went, what does this mean?
Yeah.
What could this mean for how we do church? And what it's turned into is now we all live stream our services. Woo!
Yeah.
What a win.
Yeah.
I'm not even convinced that that's good. I think the fact that we're live streaming services, there are some people I get that have like profound social anxiety or physical challenges that make it difficult to get to a gathered space. I get that, and for them, fantastic. But for a whole bunch of people, it's just made it easier to opt out of the bits of church we don't like.
Yeah.
You just mute the worship, or don't have to do the social time, or half listen to the message, or whatever. It's actually exacerbated the consumer model of church rather than encouraged people to be genuine community.
I think it's interesting what you were saying too about, we've fallen back into that consumer way of doing things where we even know it's not great for us, because that's actually like the very similar way to what we're talking about with the environmental stuff.
Yeah.
That there's so much that we know about the world and what's good about it and how to do things well with it. And we just fall into the habits of what's easy.
Mm-hmm.
And also, all the things that we got taught that weren't a problem that we've suddenly realised, oh, heck, that's a massive problem.
Yeah.
Like, plastic is going to be awesome for the world. And then, finding out that actually this is actually a really big problem. Yeah, even listening to someone on another podcast, and they were talking about how pretty much every way that we've got of creating energy for ourselves involves burning stuff. And yet you look at the way that nature creates energy for itself, and there's very little of that involved, and what we could learn from that and how we could harness that. And just got me, really thinking about that of, we so often default to what's easy and not what's beneficial or what's beautiful or what's good. That's so great to hear that your kind of personal journey around this and your church journey actually can marry together a bit. Because I know for a lot of people who are passionate about environmental stuff, they're in a church space, well, if they're Christian, they're in a church space going, how does this relate to this space? And not finding that much synergy. Why do you think the church as a whole has typically been slow to get on board with supporting work around reducing climate change and stuff? Big question.
Yeah, it is a big question. I'm sure. I'm not a historian by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think about things sort of contextually. It hasn't always been true of the church. Up until the Industrial Revolution, most humans in most of the world lived in relationship to the natural rhythms of the world, with the exception of like Roman aqueducts that have been left behind. There's actually not that much of a footprint of ancient civilizations because they made stuff out of plants. They made stuff out of wood. And then you look at movements like Francis of Assisi and the way that he lived in relationship with plants and animals. There is a stream within church history Christian church history where people have lived very much in relationship to creation. A few things, this is my telling of the story, but a few things happen sort of simultaneously. One of the things that I think happened in and through the Reformation is faith moved from being about how we live and move in the world and more what we think about the world. And so if you believed the right things, it meant that you were justified and, you were declared righteous, and when you died, you got to go to the nice place.
Yeah.
And that became like basically an escapist theology became the dominant theology of the church for the last sort of 400-ish years. Not for the whole church, but definitely for the Protestant expressions of it. And I think if your eschatology, if you're thinking about what happens when you die or at the end of the age, is centered around going somewhere else and Earth not being a relevant part of the story, then why would you be interested in caring for the planet as it is? So I think that's probably one of the significant theological threads. And then secondarily to that, the cultural context that we live in, like the systems that we live in as a result of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and now the upswing of technology that's happened post World War II especially. We just live in a cultural context where the systems themselves are very hard to live outside of, and the systems themselves are pretty destructive for climate. Yeah. And so it's really, really difficult to even imagine living a life where you're not contributing to the problem. And so it's so hard to live with that tension that it's easier to just try and ignore it to some extent. And I mean, I think Christians especially, or the church, just goes, it's too hard, but what we can do is, worry about the state of your soul. Or what I did when I was at Attitude, I was like, this is so hard, but there's this tangible thing, which is we have some of the worst youth suicide rates in the world. Maybe I'll just put all of my effort into something that's slightly more tangible, which is our youth mental health crisis, and go, that's something that I can give my energy to.
I mean, thinking about that being your experience of going, oh, look, I can't do this. When you're thinking of like the average person who might be thinking that same sort of thing, when we've got such a massive problem, this issue is huge. Mm-hmm. What would you say to them about, what they can do and why it matters?
My experience with the tiny little river regeneration project that we run, and I mean it's small on like its own scale. It's like a 800 meter long reserve that's at its widest like 20 meters wide, and over the past 3 years we've planted like 3,000 plants or something. Ecologically it's small, but to walk through that space, it is like a grounding po for me. It's a centering spot where I'm like, in the grand chaos of everything, at least in some small but significant way, I'm like making a positive difference. So get involved. There's an amazing organisation here in Christchurch called Water Trust, and their entire way of being in the world is when people heal the land, it heals people. And there's something profound about actually just caring for a little piece of whenua and leaving the actual dirt better than you found it. And you can do it in your backyard, or you can do it at a public reserve. Yes, there's other things you can do. You can change the way you use energy. You can turn your lights off. You can recycle. You can refuse to buy products that can't be recycled. You could get an electric bike. There's lots of stuff you can do. And a lot of those things are actually saying no, like they're not doing things that you're currently doing. That stuff's important. I really care about it. I also care about stuff that you could do that you aren't doing. And for me, and my holistic well-being, my te whare tapawha, when I am actively involved in making a little piece of whenua better, it does something deep in my soul that makes me feel like a more whole and a more alive human in the context of a warming, terrifying world and outlook. Yeah. And I think the other part of it from a Christian perspective is there is Christian hope about the restoration of all things at the end of the age, but the call in the meantime is to model and implement the putting to rightness here and now. Yeah. And when we step into that, even though things are wrong with the world, it literally creates a pocket of heaven on earth,
Yeah.
where in that moment and in that place and in that small way, things are right in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love how that's going, hey, this big issue is there. Climate change is a thing, but actually it's more than that. Actually, what is good for the land is good for us.
Mm-hmm.
What is good for the earth actually heals us. Each of us can do little things that actually connect us back with the creation. And I think it's easy to forget that in the scope of all the bigness of things and all the despair around, major corporations and this and that and the other. But no, I think that's really beautiful. So you mentioned with the Wilberforce Foundation, so you're working with them.
Yeah.
You're partnering with Rocha
Mm-hmm.
and Eco Church. Do you want to just tell us about, well, who's Wilberforce Foundation? Who is Rocha and what the heck is an Eco Church?
Oh, yeah. I actually have a very fun life. I get to work with a whole bunch of really interesting people and a whole bunch of really interesting things, which is cool. So I work as a pastor at the River Ōpāwaho. That's my little church community. That's a beautiful thing. We're just trying different expressions of doing and being church. Love it. And then when I'm not there, I work for an organisation called the Wilberforce Foundation. So most people know Wilberforce as William Wilberforce.
The guy who ended slavery.
And most people know him as the guy that ended slavery. But that was one of his main things. He was also passionate about the reformation of manners, which is really interesting. And which is, a shifting English culture that had gone astray. And he also really cared about people engaging with Christian faith, and he was like one of the founding members and significant to the Clapham sect, which was an organisation, not even an organisation, a network of families and friends and ragtag scallywags who created and formed hundreds of organisations that were Christian in essence and set up to be of benefit to the wider fabric of English society. So fascinating. Wilberforce here in New Zealand sort of draws from some of that Clapham sect legacy, and we know that there are actually thousands of Christian organisations trying to bring social good and do good for the fabric of New Zealand society. And a huge part of what we do is fund and support those organisations, but also try and create a network of those organisations, which is incredible. I mean, just yesterday I got to bring together a whole bunch of the different organisations from Christchurch, and we met at Te Whare Waiutuutu, which is Kate Shepherd House, which is just a recently opened museum that tells the story of Kate Shepherd. And so to bring a group of organisations who are all passionate about doing good for society and hear the story of this incredible Christian woman who was able to harness, and empowering a massive network of people to petition Parliament to get women the vote, on a justice issue. It's just epic. Yeah. So that's what Wilberforce kind of is. Yeah, it sort of provides funding and support for organisations. And then in and through that, I get to work really closely with a Rocha, which is an international Christian conservation organisation. They're amazing. Yeah. And then they have a specific expression called Eco Church, which is helping churches to integrate sustainability and conservation and creation care into the way that we do and be church. So that's from the songs we sing to the prayers that we pray to the way that we deal with our communion, to the way we engage with our rubbish, to there are a growing number of churches who are getting involved in caring for a piece of whenua, either their church property, they're reimagining what a lawn could be used for and ripping it up and putting in community gardens. We've done that, or planting fruit trees, or reimagining the way that their land could be used, and or caring for other pieces of whenua sort of around their church. So Eco Church is, man, it's grown pretty quickly. There's now 50. Your church is an Eco Church, eh? Yeah.
Although I think the person who was the main kind of person leading it has moved on.
Okay.
And so it's figuring out, who's going to spearhead this, because you need someone to be reminding people of it,
Yeah.
don't you?
Well, the dream down the line is that this stuff just becomes so normative for churches that that's how a church functions. In the meantime, we need people who are championing this to embed these ways of being and helping people to understand why. Because, like we've said, the last 400 years of the dominant streams of Christian thinking haven't really cared about the earth, because the whole thing has been mostly about how you get to heaven.
Yeah. And it's all going to get burned up anyway. Yeah. Which actually a lot of us are realising actually that's not what the Bible teaches.
Yeah, it's not a particularly biblical narrative.
No. So, that's really cool. And yeah, for anyone that is interested in that, they can just Google Rocha.
Yep.
Or Eco Church.
Yeah, Eco Church
and find out about that sort of thing. I'll put some links in the show notes as well. Because it's a really good initiative to get your church involved in.
And Eco Church is really passionate about walking alongside churches, working out where they are and helping them to just take the next step and the next step, and helping to network churches so that we can learn from each other.
Yeah, cool.
So we can go, oh, what are you guys doing? Oh, that's a great idea. But, it hurt my soul so much when, because I've cared about this stuff for a long time now, and I get to go and speak in churches all over the place. And so go into a church and there's like, oh, man, I can't handle single-use communion cups. Yeah. It's just like think about what communion's meant to be about. It's about acknowledging what Jesus's life, death, and resurrection means for the cosmos of which we are a part of. And the way that we are celebrating it is using a single-use plastic cup, which is actually going to stay in that form and is unable to be used for anything else and won't degrade. It's actually going to make the whole cosmos slightly worse, only in a small way, but that happens every week in thousands and thousands of churches, So small steps, like moving from single-use communion cups to glass cups, or maybe joining an Anglican church where you all get to drink out of the same cup. Yeah, that's and just wiping it with a cloth. Wow, maybe the Anglicans were onto something.
So that's how we're doing it. And it's that's been a new thing for me and Beck, as we've joined in the Anglican space. But yeah, I mean, it takes away that problem, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really cool. So yeah, little things again. Yeah, but that can shape the way that we do life, rather than just little things that make us feel good about getting a pat on the back or whatever. Yeah. Which, in the end, like you said before, however we do that, it's going to be better for us in the long run. It's going to make us people that are more connected, more in tune with nature, which can only be a good thing as far as I'm concerned. So, before we finish, I want to talk to you about Ngā Here.
Ah, cool.
Which is a podcast you put out last year.
Yeah.
And honestly, that was my favourite thing of last year. My favourite podcast of last year was listening to that series, and it was just a bummer that there was only 6 of them. Yeah. Because it was such rich conversation. But so essentially, you got together with Waiora Timoni, and so a friend of yours. Yeah. And Dr. Andrew Shepherd, who's down at Otago University. Mm-hmm. And the three of you went off to the bush, essentially.
Ki te Ngā Here.
You went off grid, and you, over a couple of days, had several conversations about all the different connections between creation, the Bible, and living here in Aotearoa. Mm-hmm. Firstly, whose idea was it to go, hey, let's just go off to nowhere, and how did that come about?
Yeah, what a good question. I don't know how, but I stumbled into a conversation that was being had by a whole bunch of different people about biblical literacy, actually. Right. That's how it came about. And there were all these different ideas about how we could get people more engaged with the Bible. And I basically said, why don't we look at the stuff that we know, statistically, that people care about outside of the Bible, and then see what the Bible might have to say about that thing. And I mean, the latest research I've read from Tier Fund did a massive piece of research about the state of climate change and how people feel about it and what the church is doing in Australia. Yeah. Really worth a look. But essentially, like 86% of 18 to 40-year-olds are concerned about climate change, and yet something like 96% of churches don't address it at all.
Yeah, well.
Right? So there's this massive dissonance. And I'm like, why would people be engaged with what the Bible has to say if the Bible doesn't have anything to say to the biggest things that people are concerned about today. So I'm like, first let's engage with those types of questions. And it's not to go to the Bible looking for stuff. It's like, I know that the Bible has a heap to say about our relationship with creation. And then more specifically, like, what does that look like outworked here in this place and with our history as Aotearoa? Because that's another rabbit hole that I've fallen into. When I was talking earlier about 2 crazy God experiences that I had in close proximity, one was running through the river and God going, someone should do something about this. Yeah. The other was one summer I decided I was going to run to the top of every single one of the port hills, and to do so I had to learn all their names. I knew the Sugarloaf, and I knew Mount Pleasant, and that was pretty much it. So I learned all their names, and I ran to the top of them, and when I got to the top of each one, I would sit down and I'd say a wee karakia. And I got to the top of this one, for podcast listeners, James is pointing to the tattoo on his arm. And I sat down and I had a wee karakia, and I just felt like God said, this mountain's got another name. That was it. And I, fell through the back of the wardrobe, into Te Ao Māori and to Te Reo Māori me ona tikanga. Like, in searching for the name for that maunga, I fell into a history of New Zealand that I'd never really been introduced to, because all the names tell a story. And then I fell into thinking about Te Reo Māori not as just random words that are hard to pronounce, but names that communicated a story. And I was just desperate to find out more, so ended up going to Te Wānanga, and that's actually where we first met.
It was, yeah.
And loved it, but I just wanted to go as fast as I could, so went and did 3 years of full immersion after that, just to like learn about this space. And what I found in Te Ao Māori, and what I continue to find, is so many things. But one thing is, tangata whenua means people of the land, or people in relationship with whenua. Within Te Ao Māori, there are these ways of being in right relationship with things and people that I think we have lost in the Christian tradition. And I think there's something beautiful in the partnership between those 2 ways of being in the world. That are mutually beneficial. And so one of the things I wanted to explore with Ngā Here is, what does that look like? What does the richness of Te Ao Māori bring to our understanding of what the Bible might have to say as well about how we live in right relationship with whenua? And then how do we even do that in our cultural context, where, like I've said, the systems that shape the way that we do life are so antithetical to actually being in right relationship with the land. So that's what Ngā Here turned into. And it was an incredible experience to record that first season. I'm smack bang in the middle of editing season 2.
Nice.
And it's quite a painful process, as you'll know.
Yeah, editing's awesome.
Yeah.
Yep.
But part of the reason that Ngā Here takes a long time is because, I love this format, interviewing someone, having a conversation. But the arc of a season of Ngā Here is really curated to try and take people on a journey, which is, I think, why people enjoy the experience of what it is. But it just takes so much more. It takes so much work to make it happen. But again, I actually think that comes back to my background as a storyteller.
Totally.
I'm like, how do we go on a journey together? How do we experience something together? And how does having an experience of something impact us at a soul level? Yeah.
Definitely as a listener to it, you took us with you. It really felt like we were going on this journey with you as you were having this discussion, and while the discussion was curated, you didn't know where it was going all the time.
No.
It really was a conversation that drew things out of one another and inspired one another, and so then we kind of felt like part of it as listeners, which was really cool. So exciting that there's more to come.
Most of season 2 is actually framed up around Genesis 2 and Genesis 3, so it's all about this. It's about our relationship to whenua, but the way that we get into it is by talking about the fact that for most of us, if you're sort of like 30 or 40, our grandparents didn't have supermarkets.
Yeah, well.
And it's like a really tangible way to
Yeah.
get into how quickly we have been disconnected from where our food comes from, and as a result, disconnected from whenua, and what impact that actually has on us as people.
So yeah, look out for that. Go and listen to the first season if you haven't already. I'll put links in the show notes and get yourself immersed in that because it's really well worth a listen. What next for James Beck?
Oh man, there's so many. Again, my whole thing is just being faithful in the present with the stuff that's right in front of me. But one of the things that I'm working on at the moment that I'm excited about the possibility of is actually in the sort of food resiliency space. Christchurch City Council, interestingly, have like a food resiliency policy, which is about people having access to local food sources that are outside of supermarkets. What we found out from, the cyclone that hit the Hawke's Bay, which has heavily impacted a huge amount of our food production, is that we actually don't have particularly resilient food production systems. Globally, we found that out with the Ukraine war. Locally, we found that out with the cyclone, and that our food distribution systems are actually like heavily contributing to carbon emissions and carbon footprints. Everyone gets in a car to go everywhere to get the thing. It's transported using petrol. Anyway, all of this is a long-winded way of saying, what would it look like to have more places where you could access food locally? So Christchurch City Council has a food resiliency policy. They also have like a draft wanting to plant more trees canopy policy. And they've wanted to plant more fruit trees for a really long time. But the biggest issue is they don't want to spend more money to maintain the fruit trees, and they can't find people in the community who are willing to commit to looking after the fruit trees.
Yeah.
And so because of all the different hats that I wear, I'm like, there's a massive opportunity here for the church to partner with the council and local community to go, we'll tend to and care for 20, 30 fruit trees and take the fruit and put it in a pātaka kai and make it available to our community. That's actually not a particularly big commitment, but let's say it's dream. Let's say every church, let's say 30 churches. Let's say 100 churches we'll plant 30 fruit trees. And we all of a sudden had an extra 3,000 fruit trees across the city that maybe aren't going to produce a lot of fruit for the first 5 years, but we need to be preparing for 10, 20 years down the track.
Yeah.
If we've got really flourishing fruit trees, like urban orchards that can actually supply local, organic, healthy food to local communities, what a blessing the church could be to the community. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is broker partnerships between churches and council to see if we can get a whole bunch of those projects across the line. So there's a project I'm working on at the moment, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us, and thank you for, spurring us on with thinking about how this relates to all of us. I also want to say a big thank you for doing this within the church space, not jumping outside the church space to do it, because we need more people doing it in the church space to help change us as churches, to see this as part of who we are, and not only what we do, but how we be the people of God in the world.
Yeah.
So for you to be not only role modelling that, but then also helping facilitate connections and conversations is such a massive deal. So yeah, thank you for what you're doing to bring a bit of heaven down to earth.
Well, tēnā koe.
Hello, hello heaven. Will I hear you whisper to come near?
I found this kōrero so impacting and encouraging. Encouraging because every little bit matters. And impacting because our own well-being is tied in with how we treat the planet. So thank you, James, for who you are and for what you do. Here is a blessing for you. James, may you never stop telling stories, bringing together complex ideas and sharing them in simple ways that awaken people to deeper realities. And may those you engage with be touched by the stories you tell as you introduce fresh narratives into the world. May your work continue to be fulfilling and life-giving as you combine your skills and passions in ways that speak life into those around you. As you work with churches, councils, schools, community groups and more, may you see the beauty of the faith that you hold as God meets you in your interactions with others, in your work alongside one another, and in the very soil in which you work. May you see more and more churches picking up the work of creation care, seeing it as an integral part of their faith, rather than an optional extra. And may you find more and more creative ways to encourage churches along this path, alongside their communities. May your family flourish in life and love, as you journey with your wife and children on the road of genuine, active faith. A faith that continues to drive you to the whenua and to the people who are nurtured by it. And lastly, may you know you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Thanks to Strawn for the music and Rangi for the karakia. Join me next time for a special episode where I hand control to Kathy and Stephen of the Changes Ahead podcast, and we talk about being right, being loving, and the shifting of our faith as we grow. Until then, me inoi tātou.
E tō mātou matua I te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tau mai tō rangatiratanga, kia mea te tau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua, kia rite anō ki tō te rangi. Homai kia mātou ai nei, he taro mā mātou mō tēnei rā. Muro mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muru nei I o te hunga, e hara ana kia mātou. Aua hoki mātou e kawea, kia whakawaia. Engari whakaorangi a mātou,